I am Sydney, 30 years old, and until last Tuesday I thought I possessed a solid, predictable life. As a director of forensic accounting at a major financial firm in Chicago, my entire career revolves around uncovering hidden truths. I analyze bank statements, track offshore accounts, and catch corporate embezzlers who think they are smarter than the paper trail they leave behind. Numbers do not lie, but apparently the people you trust most certainly do. My husband Donovan, a 32-year-old mid-level sales manager who always acted like a Wall Street elite, proved that to me in the most brutal way possible. I walked into room 412 at Northwestern Memorial Hospital holding a custom gift basket. I was there to visit my best friend of 10 years, Amber, who had just given birth to twins. Amber is 30 years old, a lifestyle blogger who spent most of her time curating an aesthetic she could not actually afford, often relying on my generosity to fund her weekend getaways and designer handbag rentals. I thought I was walking in to celebrate a milestone. Instead, I stepped into the ultimate betrayal. The hospital room smelled of harsh antiseptics and expensive lilies. Donovan was sitting on the edge of Amber's bed. He was not just visiting. He was leaning in, pressing a tender kiss to her forehead, murmuring softly as she cradled two newborns. His hand was resting intimately on her leg. When the heavy wooden door clicked shut behind me, Donovan snapped his head up. All the color drained from his face. The smug, confident salesman vanished, replaced by a terrified man caught red-handed in a trap of his own making. Amber let out a dramatic gasp, clutching the hospital blankets tightly around the babies. She immediately turned on the waterworks, her eyes welling up with practiced pathetic tears. "Sydney," she whimpered, her voice trembling with artificial fragility, "please do not be angry. We never intended for this to happen. It was an accident. We just fell in love. You have to understand that this is true love." I did not scream. I did not drop the gift basket or burst into hysterical tears. When you spend your life dismantling financial fraud, you learn that emotional outbursts only give the guilty party room to manipulate the narrative. Instead, I maintained a terrifying, icy composure. I calmly set the gift basket on the small rolling table next to the door. Donovan scrambled to his feet, holding his hands up defensively. "Sydney, listen to me," he pleaded, shifting instantly into damage control mode. "You need to calm down and look at the bigger picture here. This is actually your fault. You forced my hand. You work 80 hours a week auditing corporate tax returns. You care more about your spreadsheets and your promotions than you ever cared about me. I wanted a real family, Sydney. I needed a woman who was present, not a cold calculator. Amber gave me the family you refused to provide." His attempt at gaslighting was almost comical. He was standing there trying to blame his blatant infidelity on my professional success, attempting to make me feel inadequate because I out-earned him and actually built a secure future for us. I looked at him, truly registering the pathetic nature of his excuses. "You want to talk about calculators, Donovan?" I said, my voice absolutely flat and devoid of any warmth. "Let us do some math right now." I reached into my designer tote bag and pulled out a thick manila folder. I walked slowly toward the hospital bed, my heels clicking sharply against the linoleum floor. Amber shrank back against the pillows, her fake tears drying up, as she realized I was not going to play the role of the hysterical, heartbroken wife. I dropped the manila folder directly onto Amber's lap, right next to the sleeping twins. "Those are divorce papers," I announced, staring directly into Donovan's panicked eyes. "I signed them this morning. I suggest you retain a very good attorney because I have already frozen every single joint credit line we possess." Donovan scoffed, trying to regain his arrogant posture. "You cannot just freeze our accounts, Sydney. Half of that money is mine. I am legally entitled to those funds." "You are entitled to absolutely nothing," I corrected him, stepping closer. "I am a forensic accountant, Donovan. Did you really think you could secretly leverage our joint accounts to fund Amber's lifestyle without me noticing the discrepancies? I know exactly where every dollar went. I know about the weekend trips you claimed were sales conferences. I know about the expensive dinners. I have the receipts, the internet protocol addresses, and the exact timestamps of every fraudulent transaction you made over the past 12 months. Donovan opened his mouth to argue, but the words died in his throat. The realization that he was completely outmatched began to dawn on his face. Before he could formulate another lie, I reached into my coat pocket and pulled out a set of keys. They belonged to the luxury sport utility vehicle he loved to parade around Chicago. In the car he used to project an image of immense wealth to his country club friends. I tossed the heavy keys onto the hospital floor. They hit the linoleum with a loud metallic clatter. "You will need to find a new way home," I told him, watching his eyes dart down to the keys. "I legally repossessed the vehicle at 8 o'clock this morning. If you recall, and I am sure you do not because you never read the contracts you signed, the loan is entirely in my name. The dealership has already secured the car from the hospital parking garage." Amber let out a sharp cry of indignation. "You cannot do that, Sydney. He is the father of these children. He needs a reliable vehicle. You are being completely heartless." I turned my gaze to Amber, making her flinch under my stare. "You traded a decade of genuine friendship for a bankrupt liar, Amber. You can drive him around in your least compact car." I turned back to Donovan, who was now trembling with a mixture of rage and fear. "You have until exactly 5 o'clock this evening to clear all of your personal belongings out of my house," I commanded, checking my watch with deliberate precision. "The locksmith is already standing by at the property. If you are not entirely out of my home by 5, whatever you leave behind will be donated to a local charity." "Do not test me, Donovan. You know I always follow through on my audits." I did not wait for his response. I simply turned on my heel and walked out of the hospital room, leaving the door wide open behind me. The silence I left in my wake was absolute. I walked down the brightly lit hospital corridor with my head held high, breathing in the sterile air, ready to initiate the complete and utter dismantling of his miserable life. Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to stand up to people who betrayed your trust. The drive from the hospital to my house took exactly 24 minutes. I spent that time mentally cataloging the assets, liabilities, and vulnerabilities of the man I was about to excise from my life. Pulling into the driveway of my immaculate brick home in the Chicago suburbs, I spotted a vehicle that made my jaw clench. A hideous pearl-white sedan was parked diagonally across the driveway, crushing a bed of perfectly manicured hostas. It belonged to my mother-in-law, Cynthia. She was a woman who practically sweated cheap perfume and country club pretension, possessing a staggering sense of entitlement, funded entirely by her husband Howard's rapidly dwindling investment firm. I unlocked the front door and walked into my foyer. The house was in absolute chaos. Donovan was running frantically up and down the main staircase, tossing wrinkled designer suits and golf polo shirts into cheap black garbage bags. Standing at the base of the stairs, acting like a tyrannical overseer, was Cynthia. She wore a garish floral pantsuit and clutched a faux crocodile skin handbag. The moment she heard my heels against the hardwood floor, she whipped around. Her face contorted into a mask of pure, unfiltered venom. "How dare you show your face here, you cold, barren woman!" Cynthia shrieked, her voice echoing off the vaulted ceilings. "My son just called me in tears. You humiliate him in public, you try to steal his car, and now you demand he leave his own home. You are a monster, Sydney. Donovan deserves a real woman who can give him a family, not some frigid corporate machine. You will not get away with this. I have already contacted our family attorney. We are taking half the equity in this house. My son contributed to this property, and you will write him a check today." I did not flinch. I did not raise my voice. I simply walked over to the kitchen island, unclasped my leather briefcase, and pulled out a second stack of documents. I let them drop onto the marble countertop with a heavy, satisfying thud. "Your son contributed absolutely nothing to this property, Cynthia." I stated, my tone so dangerously calm that Donovan froze halfway down the stairs. "In fact, your golden boy has been actively draining our assets to fund his pathetic double life," Cynthia scoffed, crossing her arms defensively. "You are lying. Donovan makes a wonderful salary." I smiled, a sharp and unforgiving expression. "I am a forensic accountant, Cynthia. Did you honestly believe your son was smart enough to hide financial fraud from me?" I opened the first folder and spread the papers across the island. 4 months ago, Donovan forged my digital signature, to take out a secret second mortgage on this house. He pulled out $75,000 in equity. He did not invest it. He did not put it in a savings account. He blew every single cent on Amber. I picked up a highlighted bank statement and read it aloud. $10,000 for a luxury vacation rental in Aspen. $15,000 at a boutique jeweler downtown. $5,000 for a deposit on an elite birthing suite. He maxed out 3 secret credit cards to maintain the illusion that he was a wealthy tech mogul, all while his actual salary was being garnished for unpaid parking tickets and overdue country club fees. You see, Cynthia Donovan thought he could outsmart a woman who tracks missing millions for a living. He routed the money through a dummy corporation registered in Delaware, assuming the corporate veil would shield him from my audits. He was spectacularly wrong. Donovan dropped a garbage bag, his face turning an ashen shade of gray. "Sydney, please," he begged, his voice trembling. "Do not do this in front of my mother." I ignored him entirely, keeping my eyes locked on Cynthia, whose confident posture was rapidly crumbling. "You want half the equity in this house, Cynthia?" I asked, leaning against the marble counter. "There is no equity left for him to claim. Furthermore, Donovan no longer has any legal claim to this property whatsoever." "That is impossible," Cynthia sputtered, her voice losing its shrill edge. "This is marital property. The law protects him." "It was marital property," I corrected her, "until 6 months ago. That was when I discovered the first discrepancy in our accounts. Instead of confronting him immediately, I decided to protect my investments. I transferred the deed of this house into an irrevocable trust. Donovan signed the quitclaim deed himself. I told him it was a tax optimization strategy for his impending bonus, and he signed the paperwork without reading a single page. Cynthia looked at her son in absolute horror. "You signed over the house, you idiot!" He did not just sign it over, a deep, authoritative voice echoed from the front doorway. He legally forfeited all future claims to the asset in perpetuity. I turned to see Jamal stepping into the foyer. Jamal is 33 years old, a fiercely intelligent African-American real estate attorney, and the husband of Donovan's sister, Brittany. Jamal had always seen right through Cynthia's racist microaggressions and Donovan's hollow bravado. He despised their toxic behavior, and for the past 6 months, he had been my secret legal weapon. Jamal wore a perfectly tailored charcoal suit carrying a sleek leather briefcase that matched my own. "What are you doing here, Jamal?" Cynthia demanded, her face flushing with a mix of anger and embarrassment. "This is family business. I am here in my capacity as Sydney's legal counsel," Jamal replied smoothly, his tone utterly professional and completely devoid of any familial warmth. "And as the trustee of the estate, I am officially informing you that you are both trespassing on private property." "You cannot do this," Donovan cried out, rushing down the remaining stairs. "Jamal, man, come on. We are family. You cannot throw me out on the street." Jamal adjusted his cuffs, his expression stoic. "You ceased being family the moment you betrayed my client and endangered her financial security. The trust documents you signed are ironclad, Donovan. I drafted them myself, ensuring every single clause adhered strictly to Illinois state property laws. There is no loophole. There is no grace period. You have absolutely no legal standing here. You have exactly 10 minutes to gather your garbage bags and vacate the premises. If you are not off this property by then, I will call the local precinct and have you both escorted out in handcuffs for criminal trespassing." Cynthia gasped, clutching her chest as if she had been physically struck. "You are a traitor, Jamal. Wait until Howard hears about this. We will ruin you." Jamal offered a polite, devastatingly cold smile. "I welcome the challenge, Cynthia, but right now you need to focus on leaving. The clock is ticking." The reality of the situation finally crushed whatever remaining pride Donovan possessed. He looked at his mother, who was hyperventilating by the door, and then at me. There was no pity in my eyes. He scrambled to grab the cheap plastic bags filled with his wrinkled clothes, dragging them across the hardwood floor like a defeated scavenger. He did not say another word. He pushed past Jamal, hauled his garbage bags out the front door, and practically shoved his mother toward her tacky pearl-white sedan. One of the cheap bags snagged on the doorframe, tearing open and spilling his golf shoes and luxury belts onto the porch. He scrambled on his hands and knees to gather them, his face burning with absolute humiliation. Jamal and I stood on the porch watching them shove the plastic bags into the trunk of Cynthia's car. The neighbors were beginning to peek out from their windows, whispering behind drawn curtains as the neighborhood's golden boy was unceremoniously kicked to the curb. I watched the car speed away, leaving deep tire marks on the asphalt. The eviction was brutal, efficient, and perfectly executed. But I knew this was only the opening move. The real war was just beginning. I closed the heavy oak door, the satisfying click of the deadbolt echoing through the suddenly quiet foyer. Jamal and I stood there for a moment, letting the reality of our flawless execution settle in. The toxic energy that Donovan and his mother brought into my sanctuary had been successfully purged. Jamal turned to me, adjusting his tailored suit jacket, offering a nod of pure professional respect. We had won the skirmish, but as a forensic accountant, I knew better than to underestimate desperate people. Almost on cue, my phone began to vibrate violently against the marble countertop. The screen lit up with a rapid succession of notifications. It was the extended family group chat, a digital gathering place filled with aunts, uncles, and cousins who thrived on country club gossip and manufactured drama. I picked up the device and unlocked the screen. Cynthia had wasted no time launching her offensive. The messages were frantic, dripping with weaponized victimhood. Cynthia typed paragraph after paragraph, painting me as a deranged workaholic monster. She claimed I had suffered a mental breakdown, that my obsession with corporate ladders and auditing reports had driven her poor son into the arms of a more nurturing woman. She accused me of kicking Donovan out onto the street, without a dime, deliberately ignoring the fact that he had been systematically robbing me for months. A chorus of sympathetic replies immediately flooded the chat. Distant relatives chimed in, offering prayers for Donovan and condemning my supposed cruelty. They called me heartless. They said a real wife would forgive her husband and fight for her marriage. I did not type a single emotional response. I did not justify my actions or beg for their understanding. When you argue with irrational people, you only validate their delusions. Instead, I opened my encrypted work files and began to export the data I had meticulously gathered over the past 90 days. I uploaded a consolidated financial dossier directly into the group chat. The first image was a side-by-side comparison of Donovan's declared income and his actual expenditures. I highlighted the $75,000 he had illegally extracted from our home equity. The second image was a series of itemized credit card statements showing massive charges at luxury maternity boutiques, high-end jewelers, and five-star resorts. The final upload was a collection of hotel receipts, complete with dates that perfectly matched the times Donovan claimed he was visiting his sick grandfather or attending mandatory sales retreats. Underneath the avalanche of undeniable proof, I typed a single perfectly crafted message. I am a director of forensic accounting. I do not deal in rumors, and I certainly do not deal in forgiveness when faced with financial fraud. Here is the exact cost of Donovan's new family. Any relative who wishes to support his lifestyle is welcome to assume his outstanding debts, which currently exceed $120,000. The digital silence that followed was absolute. The little typing bubbles that had been popping up furiously from various relatives suddenly vanished. The moral outrage of the extended family evaporated the second they realized they were defending a man drowning in astronomical fraudulent debt. Nobody wanted to align themselves with a massive financial liability. The group chat went completely permanently dead. Jamal, who had been watching the digital slaughter over my shoulder, let out a low chuckle. He pulled out his own phone, opening a private encrypted messaging application we used to communicate regarding the divorce strategy. He typed a quick message and showed me the screen. The legal trap is perfectly in place, his message read. I just received the preliminary filings from his bargain bin attorney. Donovan is incredibly eager to rush this through. I looked at Jamal, raising an eyebrow. He is not contesting the division of liabilities. Jamal shook his head, a sharp, knowing smile crossing his face. not even slightly. He is so blinded by his arrogance and his desperate desire to start playing the role of the wealthy patriarch with Amber that he is ignoring basic legal counsel. His lawyer probably advised him to challenge the credit card debt, but Donovan just wants the divorce decree signed so he can move Amber into whatever luxury apartment he thinks he can still afford. He has zero concept of the legal avalanche waiting for him. I walked over to the coffee maker, initiating a fresh brew, my mind analyzing the variables. Donovan always believed he was the smartest person in the room. His parents, particularly Howard and Cynthia, had spent 3 decades shielding him from the consequences of his own profound stupidity. They had convinced him that his mediocrity was actually unappreciated genius. That delusion was going to cost him everything. I poured 2 cups of coffee, handing one to Jamal. We need to ensure the final paperwork explicitly details his assumption of the hidden debt without raising any red flags that might cause him to reconsider, I said, taking a measured sip. Jamal leaned against the counter, his analytical mind working in perfect tandem with mine. The documentation is buried in the standard equitable distribution clauses. He thinks because you are keeping the house, which has zero equity for him anyway, he is getting a clean break. He is so focused on his new life that he is sprinting directly into the slaughterhouse. He has not even questioned why you are not fighting for alimony or spousal support. Because he thinks I am too proud to ask for it. I replied, staring out the window at the empty driveway, where his tires had left dark skid marks. He relies on my pride to fund his mistakes, but this time my pride is exactly what will bankrupt him. Jamal took a sip of his coffee, nodding in agreement. We file the final motion tomorrow morning. By the time he realizes the scope of the financial ruin, he just legally accepted the ink will be dry and the judge will have slammed the gavel. He is walking right into the courtroom with a blindfold on, firmly convinced he holds all the winning cards. Cynthia would undoubtedly try to spin this new development to her wealthy friends, pretending that her son simply chose to walk away from a toxic marriage. She would frame Amber as the ultimate prize, a woman who truly understood family values. I knew Amber was currently sitting in her hospital room dreaming of country club memberships and unlimited credit cards, completely unaware that she had just tied herself to an unemployed man drowning in 6 figures of high-interest debt. They were both living in a fantasy world constructed by Donovan's pathological lies. I looked at the digital clock on the kitchen wall. It was exactly 6 in the evening. In less than 24 hours, Donovan would walk into a courtroom thinking he had won the lottery, completely oblivious to the fact that he was about to sign away his entire future. The trap was set, the evidence was secured, and the perpetrators were entirely unaware of the absolute destruction hurtling toward them. Tomorrow my husband would finalize his own financial demise, leaving me perfectly positioned to watch the beautiful, inevitable fallout of his monumental betrayal. The fluorescent lights of the Cook County Courthouse buzzed with a low, sterile hum that perfectly matched my mood. It was exactly 9 in the morning. I sat at the polished wooden table in courtroom 4B, my posture impeccably straight, my hands folded over a sleek leather folio. Jamal sat beside me, radiating the calm, lethal confidence of an attorney who had thoroughly rigged the game long before stepping onto the playing field. We were waiting for the final act of my marriage to commence. The heavy double doors at the back of the courtroom swung open. Donovan marched down the center aisle with the swagger of a man who believed he had just conquered the world. He wore a navy blue suit that was slightly too tight, a desperate attempt to project the image of a wealthy, successful patriarch. He checked his expensive watch twice before even reaching the defendant's table. He looked intensely annoyed, as if the legal dissolution of our decade-long relationship was merely a minor traffic delay on his way to his glorious new life with Amber. His attorney trailed behind him. The man looked incredibly overworked, clutching a disorganized stack of file folders, clearly hired from a discount firm because Donovan had no liquid assets left to afford proper representation. Donovan did not even look at me. He kept his eyes fixed on the judge's bench, tapping his foot with restless, arrogant energy. He wanted to get back to the hospital. He wanted to play house. The presiding judge, a stern woman with zero tolerance for courtroom theatrics, called our case. Jamal stood up, buttoning his suit jacket. He approached the bench with the final marital settlement agreement. It was an absolute masterpiece of legal drafting. Buried within the standard boilerplate language of equitable distribution were the specific clauses we had quietly engineered the night before. The document clearly outlined that all revolving credit lines, personal loans, and secondary mortgages acquired by Donovan over the past 12 months would remain his sole undivided financial responsibility. The judge glanced over the extensive paperwork and peered down at Donovan. "Mr. Brooks," the judge asked, her voice echoing in the quiet room, "have you reviewed this settlement agreement extensively with your legal counsel?" Donovan's attorney leaned in frantically, whispering something about needing a recess to properly audit the debt schedules attached in Appendix C. He was trying to do his job. He was trying to warn his client that the math looked incredibly suspicious and highly disadvantageous. But Donovan brushed him off with a deeply irritated wave of his hand. "Yes, Your Honor," Donovan stated loudly, projecting his voice so I would hear every single word. "I have reviewed it. I am not interested in dragging this out or fighting over pennies. I just want a clean break so I can get back to my real family. I waive all rights to the house. Let her keep it. I am moving on to bigger and better things." The sheer magnitude of his stupidity was breathtaking. He was so consumed by his own ego, so desperate to play the magnanimous billionaire, walking away from a bitter ex-wife, that he was entirely ignoring the flashing red lights his own lawyer was desperately pointing toward. He thought he was merely giving me an empty house. He had absolutely no idea he was formally accepting over $120,000 in high-interest fraudulent debt. "Are you certain?" the judge pressed, raising an eyebrow at his completely dismissive attitude. "Once you sign this decree, the division of liabilities is final. You cannot claim ignorance later in this court." "I am absolutely certain," Donovan replied, with a smug, triumphant grin. "Where do I sign?" The bailiff handed him the document and a pen. I watched quietly as Donovan hastily flipped to the final page. He did not read a single line of the text. He did not pause to consider why I, a forensic accountant who tracked missing corporate funds for a living, had surrendered so easily without demanding a single cent of spousal support. He pressed the pen to the paper and signed his name with aggressive, sweeping strokes. Beside me, Jamal remained perfectly still, but I could feel the subtle shift in his energy. The trap had sprung. The steel jaws had snapped shut around Donovan's ankle, and he had happily pulled the lever himself. The judge reviewed the signatures, nodded once, and struck her wooden gavel against the sounding block. The sharp, decisive crack echoed through the room. "The marriage is legally dissolved," she announced. "You are dismissed." It was over. The legal tether binding me to his pathetic existence was entirely severed. I calmly began packing my documents back into my briefcase. But Donovan was not quite finished. He could not simply walk away with a quiet victory. His fragile ego demanded an audience. His vanity required a final theatrical display of dominance. Donovan stepped away from his table and turned to face me, directly puffing out his chest. He looked at Jamal, then locked his gaze on my face, wanting to ensure his words inflicted maximum emotional damage. "By the way, Sydney," Donovan announced, his voice carrying clearly across the emptying courtroom, "since you care so much about legal documents, you will be thrilled to know I took care of some other paperwork this morning before coming here. I stopped by the hospital records department. I officially signed the voluntary acknowledgement of paternity for Amber's twins." He paused, waiting for me to break, waiting for the tears he felt he was owed. When I simply stared back at him with a blank expression, he continued, his tone dripping with absolute malice. "My name is on both birth certificates. They are legally my children now. No courts, no waiting periods. I claimed them. I am building the legacy you were too selfish to give me. I am a father, Sydney. I finally have the family I deserve." He turned on his heel and swaggered out through the heavy wooden doors, leaving his bewildered, exhausted lawyer rushing to pack up his files and follow him. Donovan walked out of that courthouse believing he had just delivered a fatal, crushing blow to my psyche. He believed he had won the war and secured a flawless future. I slowly zipped my leather briefcase shut, the metallic sound sharp in the quiet room. I turned my head slightly, catching Jamal's eye. Jamal looked back at me, his perfectly composed professional facade cracking just enough to reveal a cold, predatory gleam. I did not cry. I did not scream. I simply gave Jamal a subtle, knowing smirk. Donovan had just permanently chained himself to a rapidly sinking ship, and he had gladly handed me the heavy iron anchor. While Jamal and I were securely filing financial injunctions downtown, a profoundly different scene was unfolding 20 miles away in the affluent North Shore. I was not physically present to witness Donovan's grand homecoming, but the exact details of that afternoon would soon become public record, meticulously documented in sworn depositions and the frantic voicemails that followed. As an accountant, I pieced together narratives from data. I can picture the sequence of events with terrifying clarity. Donovan arrived at his parents' sprawling suburban estate in a premium rideshare, refusing a standard taxi to align with his fabricated self-image. The property was an ostentatious monument to leveraged debt, masquerading as generational wealth, featuring towering white pillars and imported marble floors. Howard Donovan's father sat in his mahogany study, swirling a glass of expensive scotch. Cynthia, his mother, paced the grand foyer, coordinating catering details for an upcoming charity gala. They were a family obsessed with appearances, completely oblivious to the financial guillotine swinging toward their necks. Donovan pushed through the doors, his chest puffed out with the triumphant swagger of a conquering hero. He tossed his suit jacket over a velvet chair and announced his arrival with a booming voice. "It is done," he declared, marching directly toward the custom wet bar in the living room. "The Ice Queen is officially out of our lives. The judge signed the decree 10 minutes ago. I am a free man, and I did not surrender a single dime to her." Howard chuckled, raising his scotch glass in a silent gesture of approval, firmly believing his son had outsmarted a highly trained financial auditor. Cynthia beamed with delight, smoothing down her tailored silk blouse. "I knew she would crumble." Cynthia sneered, her voice dripping with venomous satisfaction. "Women like Sydney rely entirely on intimidation. Once you stood your ground, she had no choice but to surrender. Now we can finally focus on integrating Amber into the country club. She understands the importance of building a respectable family legacy." Donovan grinned, pulling a chilled vintage champagne bottle from the wine fridge. He expertly popped the cork, the loud celebratory snap echoing off the vaulted ceilings. He retrieved 3 crystal flutes, pouring the bubbling golden liquid with steady hands. He handed one glass to his father and crossed the Persian rug to hand the second to his mother. He held his own glass high, vibrating with inflated ego. To fresh starts, Donovan toasted, his eyes shining with pure delusion. To leaving behind cold, calculating women and embracing a real future. But that is not even the best part. I made sure to secure my legacy today. I did not just finalize the divorce. I made an executive decision to protect my new family. Cynthia smiled warmly, taking a delicate sip of champagne. "What do you mean, darling? Did you secure a new investment portfolio for the babies? Did you establish a trust fund?" Donovan shook his head, his smile growing wider, entirely convinced of his own brilliance. "I did something much more permanent," he bragged, completely unaware he was describing the exact mechanism of his own destruction. "I went to the hospital records department right before my court appearance. Amber was resting, so I handled the paperwork myself. I officially signed the voluntary acknowledgement of paternity for the twins. My name is on the birth certificate's mom. The state registry processed the documents. Those boys are legally, undeniably mine. No one can ever take them away from me." The air in the living room evaporated instantly. The warm, celebratory atmosphere vanished, replaced by a suffocating, freezing vacuum. Cynthia stopped breathing. The muscles in her face went slack, all the color draining from her skin until she looked like a wax mannequin. Her eyes widened in absolute terror, staring at her son as if he had just transformed into a ghost. The heavy crystal flute slipped from her trembling fingers. It hit the imported marble floor with a sharp, violent crash. Shards of expensive glass exploded outward. The vintage champagne pooled over the white stones, seeping into the grout like a spreading stain. The sudden violent noise startled Howard, who immediately jumped up from his leather chair. "Cynthia, what is the matter with you?" Howard demanded, rushing toward his wife. "Are you having palpitations again?" Cynthia did not hear her husband. She could not hear anything except the deafening roar of her own catastrophic failure collapsing around her. Under American family law, signing a voluntary acknowledgement of paternity establishes irrefutable binding legal fatherhood. It bypasses the requirement for any genetic testing. Once that specific document is executed and filed with the government registry, the signatory becomes entirely financially responsible for the children until they reach the age of 18, regardless of any biological reality. It is an inescapable financial contract. Cynthia knew this. More importantly, she knew the devastating, humiliating medical truth that she had spent over a decade meticulously hiding from her own son to protect his fragile masculinity. She knew that Donovan was completely irreversibly sterile. She knew those children were not his biological offspring. And she knew that he had just legally bound himself to provide 18 years of child support for babies she had secretly purchased. Donovan lowered his glass, his arrogant smile faltering as he watched his mother physically deteriorate in front of him. "Mom, what is wrong?" he asked, stepping carefully around the shattered crystal. "You should be thrilled. I claimed my sons." Cynthia began to hyperventilate. Her chest heaved rapidly, her hands clutching her throat as she struggled to pull oxygen into her lungs. The room was spinning. The sheer staggering magnitude of the financial and legal ruin her son had just locked himself into crashed down upon her. She looked at Donovan, her voice reduced to a hoarse, trembling whisper that cut through the silence of the massive house. "She still has not told you about that." Cynthia gasped her words, shaking with absolute dread. Donovan frowned, his brow furrowing in deep confusion. "Told me about what Mom Amber tells me everything. We do not have secrets." Cynthia's knees buckled. Howard had to catch her by the shoulders to prevent her from collapsing completely onto the wet marble. She realized in that paralyzing moment, Amber had played her. Amber had taken the illicit payout, undergone the anonymous donor fertilization, and deliberately let Donovan sign the binding legal paperwork, securing a lifetime of financial extortion. The steel trap had closed, and Cynthia had bought the bait. 3 months evaporated into the crisp Chicago autumn, bringing a profound, immaculate silence to my life. While Donovan and Cynthia were entirely consumed by the catastrophic legal and financial quicksand they had sprinted into, my trajectory was exclusively upward. The executive board at my firm recognized the meticulous precision I applied to our corporate accounts, promoting me to Director of Forensic Accounting. I moved into a spacious, sunlit penthouse downtown, far away from the suburban monotony I once shared with a pathological liar. The substantial salary increase was merely a bonus. The true reward was waking up every single day in an environment completely devoid of manipulation, gaslighting, and manufactured drama. My personal and professional ledgers were finally and perfectly balanced. It was a brisk Sunday morning. I was sitting at my kitchen island, sipping a freshly brewed espresso, reviewing an international tax audit for a high-profile client. The penthouse was a fortress of tranquility, shielded by state-of-the-art security and the comforting hum of the city far below. The digital chime of my front door intercom pierced the quiet. I frowned, glancing at the security monitor mounted on the wall. I was not expecting any deliveries, and unannounced visitors simply did not align with my heavily structured routine. The camera feed showed a woman pacing erratically outside my door, a bulky double stroller completely blocking the hallway view. I set down my ceramic mug, walked over to the entryway, and pulled open the heavy steel door. I prepared my standard dismissal for whoever had bypassed the lobby concierge. However, the words died in my throat. Standing on my welcome mat was Amber. If the security camera had captured her face clearly, I would not have opened the door at all. The woman trembling before me bore absolutely no resemblance to the smug, glamorous lifestyle blogger who had proudly posed in a hospital bed with my husband 90 days prior. The meticulously curated aesthetic was completely gone. Amber looked utterly destroyed. Her previously flawless blonde hair was matted into a messy, greasy knot at the base of her neck. She wore a stained, oversized gray sweatshirt and cheap, threadbare sweatpants that pooled over scuffed sneakers. Dark, heavy bags dragged down her eyes, which were red and swollen from what looked like days of uninterrupted crying. She possessed none of the arrogant radiance she had weaponized against me in the maternity ward. The two infants strapped into the cheap plastic stroller were screaming at the top of their lungs, their faces flushed with agitation. The noise was deafening, a chaotic assault on my peaceful Sunday morning. Amber rocked the stroller back and forth with a frantic, jerky motion, trying and failing to pacify them. I stared at her for exactly 3 seconds. I did not feel an ounce of sympathy. I felt the cold, hard logic of consequence manifesting right on my doorstep. Without uttering a single syllable, I grabbed the heavy brass handle of my door and shoved it forward, fully intending to shut her out of my life permanently. "Wait!" Amber shrieked, lunging forward with a burst of desperate energy. She thrust her scuffed sneaker into the doorframe just as the heavy metal was about to click shut. The door slammed painfully against her ankle. She let out a sharp gasp of pain, but refused to pull her foot back. She wedged her shoulder into the narrow gap, gripping the doorframe with white knuckles. Tears spilled over her eyelashes, cutting trails through the dirt and exhaustion on her face. "Sydney, please." Amber sobbed, her voice cracking under the strain of absolute desperation. "Please do not shut the door. I know you hate me. I know what I did was unforgivable. I know I am the last person on earth you ever want to see again. But you have to listen to me. I have nowhere else to go. They took everything from me." "Remove your foot from my door, Amber," I commanded, my voice dropping to a freezing, authoritative register. "I will not ask you a second time before I call building security and have you arrested for trespassing." Amber shook her head wildly, crying so hard she was practically hyperventilating. The babies continued to wail, a relentless soundtrack to her absolute ruin. "I am begging you, Sydney, just give me 5 minutes. That is all I am asking for. 5 minutes of your time. You deserve to know the whole truth. You need to know exactly what Cynthia and Donovan did. They set us both up." Her words hung in the chilly hallway air. As an auditor, my entire existence is built on extracting the truth from hidden ledgers and buried transactions. I knew Donovan was a financial parasite, and I knew Cynthia was a toxic, manipulative enabler. I had already gathered enough data to ruin them. However, Amber's pathetic, shattered demeanor suggested there was a deeper layer of fraud I had not yet uncovered. The dataset was incomplete. My professional curiosity, the compulsive need to possess every single variable in an equation, briefly overrode my intense desire to slam the door on her hand. I slowly pulled the door back open, releasing the pressure on her bruised ankle. Amber let out a ragged sigh of relief, immediately taking a step forward to cross the threshold into my pristine penthouse. "Stop right there," I ordered, holding up my hand to halt her progress. Amber froze, shrinking back as if I had physically struck her. "You do not get to walk into my home." I stated, my tone offering zero comfort or hospitality. "You do not get a cup of tea, a tissue, or a comfortable chair to cry on. You gave up the privilege of my friendship the moment you decided to help my ex-husband humiliate me. You will stand exactly where you are on the other side of this threshold." Amber nodded frantically, swiping roughly at her tear-stained cheeks with the sleeve of her dirty sweatshirt. "Yes. Okay. I understand. I will stay right here." "Thank you, Sydney. Thank you for just listening to me." I leaned against the doorframe, crossing my arms tightly over my chest. I maintained a rigid, unyielding posture, staring down at the woman who had tried to steal my life, only to discover she had stolen a sinking ship. "You said I deserved to know the whole truth," I replied, checking the expensive silver watch on my wrist. "You begged for 5 minutes. Your time starts right now. Speak fast, Amber, and do not waste a single second trying to make me feel sorry for you." Amber swallowed hard, her eyes darting nervously down to the screaming babies in the stroller before looking back up at me. She gripped the handle of the stroller, bracing herself as if preparing to jump off a very high ledge. She opened her mouth, and the twisted, grotesque reality of the ultimate deception finally began to spill out into the open air. "The twins are not his." Amber blurted out the words with violent force. They are not Donovan's biological children. He is not the father, Sydney. I stared at her. My expression remained completely unchanged. As an auditor, I am trained to compartmentalize shocking data and instantly check for logical discrepancies. Donovan and Amber had proudly paraded their affair. He had signed the birth certificates in open court. To claim now that he was not the father seemed like a desperate lie from a woman seeking a handout. I remained silent, letting the weight of her statement hang between us, waiting for her to provide the supporting documentation. "He cannot have children," Amber continued. Her voice rose in pitch, cracking under the strain of her confession. "He has never been able to have children. When he was 18 years old, he contracted a severe case of the mumps. It caused catastrophic complications. It completely, totally, and irreversibly destroyed his entire reproductive system. Donovan is 100% sterile, Sydney. He has been shooting blanks his entire adult life." My analytical mind immediately began processing this new variable. A decade of marriage flashed before my eyes. Donovan had always refused to get tested when we discussed starting a family, deflecting the conversation or blaming my stressful career for our lack of conception. The puzzle pieces were rapidly shifting, aligning into a deeply disturbing picture. "If Donovan is completely sterile," I stated, keeping my voice dangerously level, "then whose screaming infants are currently parked on my doorstep?" Amber swallowed hard, gripping the plastic handle of the stroller until her knuckles turned entirely white. "They belong to an anonymous sperm donor," she confessed, her eyes darting nervously to the floor. "I went to a fertility clinic across town. I underwent in vitro fertilization. I picked out a donor profile that matched Donovan's physical characteristics. Blue eyes, dark hair, tall. I spent several long, grueling months injecting myself with high-dosage hormones to make absolutely sure the medical procedure took." I scrutinized her pathetic, shivering form. "In vitro fertilization is an incredibly expensive and grueling medical procedure. You were struggling to pay for your rented designer handbags, Amber. You certainly did not possess the capital to fund an anonymous donor pregnancy out of pocket. Who financed this elaborate and incredibly expensive medical fraud?" A fresh, heavy wave of hot tears cascaded down Amber's filthy, tear-stained cheeks. "It was Cynthia," she sobbed, her voice echoing off the walls of the corridor. "Your mother-in-law paid for everything. She orchestrated the entire thing." I finally felt a genuine spike of shock pierce through my carefully maintained armor. Cynthia, the woman obsessed with bloodlines and country club pedigree, had financed a fake pregnancy using anonymous genetic material. The sheer lunacy of the scheme was staggering, yet mathematically it aligned perfectly with her deeply toxic nature. "Explain the timeline," I demanded, my tone shifting into an aggressive interrogation. "Give me the exact chronological sequence right now." Amber nodded frantically, eager to comply, desperate to unload her guilt. "Cynthia approached me about a year ago," she explained, her words tumbling out in a rapid, hysterical rush. "It was right after your firm promoted you to that senior position. Cynthia was furious. She hated the fact that you earned more than her son. She hated that you refused to quit your job and play the role of the submissive, obedient wife. She knew she could never control you. More importantly, she was terrified that you would eventually force Donovan to get fertility testing. She knew that if you discovered he was the reason you could not conceive, you would leave him. So she decided to strike first," I deduced, watching the horrifying narrative snap into crystal clear focus. "She protected her golden boy." "Yes," Amber cried, wiping her nose with her sleeve. Cynthia knew Donovan's ego was incredibly fragile. If he found out he was less of a man, that he was sterile, it would destroy his entire fabricated self-image. Cynthia had deliberately hidden his teenage medical records from him. Donovan genuinely believes he is perfectly healthy. He genuinely believes these boys are his miracle children. Cynthia needed a way to force you out of the family while simultaneously giving Donovan the perfect patriarchal narrative he always wanted. She needed an incubator who would follow her orders, and she chose you. I stated, the ultimate insult crystallizing in my mind. "Because you were cheap, highly desperate, and already deeply jealous of my entire life." Amber winced, but she did not deny the accusation. She offered me $50,000 in cash delivered under the table in untraceable installments. She promised me that if I went through with the anonymous donor procedure, seduced Donovan, and convinced him I was carrying his miracle babies, she would ensure I never had to worry about money again. She promised me a luxury lifestyle. She told me Donovan would leave you instantly the moment I announced the pregnancy. The grotesque scale of the betrayal was difficult to process. My mother-in-law had purchased a woman to serve as a biological Trojan horse to dismantle my marriage and protect a medical lie. Cynthia had weaponized human life, treating these two screaming infants not as grandchildren, but as tactical assets deployed to execute a hostile family takeover. Donovan actually thinks he beat the odds. Amber continued, her voice dropping to a pathetic whisper. When I told him I was pregnant, he cried. He thanked me for making him a real man. He paraded me around the hospital because he finally felt superior to you. He has absolutely no idea that his mother bought the sperm, bought my silence, and orchestrated the entire affair just to get rid of you. I stood there in the doorway of my pristine Chicago penthouse, looking down at the broken woman who had actively conspired to completely ruin my personal and professional life for a mere $50,000 payout. The absolute staggering level of calculated deception was completely beyond anything I had ever uncovered in a massive corporate financial audit. Amber stood shivering in the hallway, clutching the stroller, waiting for my reaction. She fully expected me to scream uncontrollably. She genuinely expected me to completely fall apart, but she vastly underestimated the person she was dealing with. My analytical mind was no longer focused on the emotional pain of the betrayal. My sharp mind was rapidly calculating the profoundly devastating legal implications of the voluntary acknowledgement of paternity document Donovan had proudly signed in open family court. The legal dominoes were now perfectly aligned on the board, and Cynthia had blindly handed me the heavy iron hammer required to completely crush them all. I stared at the woman wedged in my doorway, processing the sheer magnitude of the catastrophic mess she had willingly entered. For a brief moment, the silence in the hallway was only broken by the exhausted whimpers of the two donor infants. Then I asked the obvious question. Why are you standing on my welcome mat today, Amber? If Cynthia orchestrated this flawless, highly lucrative maternal fantasy, why are you begging for my attention instead of shopping for designer strollers on the North Shore? Amber gripped the handle of her cheap plastic stroller, her knuckles bone white. Because the money is completely gone, she cried, fresh tears spilling down her face. Cynthia promised me a life of absolute luxury. She swore that once Donovan divorced you, I would step right into your shoes. She told me Donovan made incredible money, that he would buy me a massive house, and that we would spend our weekends drinking mimosas at the country club. But that is not what happened. You ruined him, Sydney. You gave him all the debt. When the judge finalized the divorce, Donovan came back to my tiny apartment and proudly announced he was a free man. But a week later, the collection agencies started calling non-stop. He cannot even afford to buy basic formula for the twins. His bank accounts are entirely frozen. I offered a sharp, merciless smile. I am fully aware of his financial constraints, I replied smoothly. Did he happen to mention why his generous corporate salary suddenly stopped hitting his bank account? Amber shook her head, looking utterly confused and pathetic. He told me the company was downsizing. She sniffled, wiping her nose on her sleeve. He said he was a victim of corporate restructuring and that the economy was just bad right now. I laughed, a short sound echoing loudly in the corridor. He was not downsized, Amber. I personally ensured his rapid termination. During my forensic review of our marital assets, I noticed a very distinct sloppy pattern in his corporate expense reports. He was actively embezzling company funds, funneling client entertainment budgets directly into your luxury hotel stays and romantic dinners. As a licensed professional, I had a strict ethical obligation to report corporate theft. I compiled a detailed, undeniable dossier of his fraudulent expenditures, complete with your social media posts that geographically matched the stolen funds. I mailed it directly to his human resources director. He was fired for cause exactly 4 days after our divorce was finalized. He is practically unemployable in this entire city. The color completely drained from Amber's dirty, tear-stained face. She stumbled backward half a step, the reality of Donovan's absolute professional destruction finally piercing her delusion. When I realized he was totally broke, I panicked, she confessed, her voice dropping to a desperate, raspy whisper. I went straight to Cynthia. I drove to the mansion and demanded she honor our arrangement. I told her the $50,000 was supposed to be just the down payment for my new life. I threatened to tell Donovan the truth about the anonymous donor sperm if she did not write me another check immediately. And let me guess, I interrupted, leaning casually against the doorframe. Cynthia immediately cut you off. Amber nodded, sobbing much harder now. She laughed in my face. She called me a delusional gold-digging tramp. She said she had absolutely no idea what I was talking about regarding any fertility clinic or any $50,000. She told me the payments were cash and totally untraceable. She told me that if I ever came near her property again, or tried to tell Donovan any wild lies about his miracle babies, she would have me arrested for extortion. She completely erased me. She got exactly what she wanted, and she left me to rot with a broke, unemployed man and 2 screaming infants. Amber looked down at her battered sneakers, then back up at me with eyes full of sheer, unadulterated panic. I am being evicted tomorrow morning, Sydney. The landlord posted the final notice on my door yesterday. Donovan has been ignoring my calls because he is out trying to beg his former friends for cash. I cannot feed these babies. I have absolutely nothing left. She reached out to grab my hand, but I pulled it away. Please, she begged, her voice cracking into a pathetic wail. I know I do not deserve it, but I need a loan. Just enough to get a cheap motel and buy some diapers. You have a massive penthouse. You just got a huge promotion. You are wealthy. Please, for the sake of the friendship we used to have, just loan me $5,000. I looked at the woman who had spent an entire decade pretending to be my confidant. I looked at the person who had willingly accepted a bribe to dismantle my marriage, completely unbothered by the devastation she thought she was causing me. I did not feel a single ounce of pity. I felt profound clinical disgust. Let us evaluate the return on your investment, Amber, I stated, my voice dropping to a freezing, razor-sharp edge. You traded a 10-year, genuine friendship with a highly successful woman who supported you, funded you, and cared for you. You traded all of that for $50,000 and the illusion of a country club lifestyle. And what did you actually purchase with your monumental betrayal? I stepped forward, forcing her to instinctively pull her foot back from my doorframe. You bought yourself a disgraced, unemployed, bankrupt fraud. I continued, enunciating every single word with brutal clarity. You tied yourself permanently to a totally sterile liar who cannot even afford his own parking tickets, let alone a luxury mortgage. You allowed a toxic, manipulative mother-in-law to use your body as a biological weapon, and the moment the missile detonated, she threw you straight into the garbage. You played a high-stakes financial game without understanding a single rule, and now you are facing the absolute consequence of your own staggering greed. Amber opened her mouth, a fresh wail of despair building in her throat, but I raised my hand, silencing her instantly. I am not a charity, Amber. I do not finance traitors, and I certainly do not bail out failed mercenaries. You wanted my life so desperately that you crawled into a hospital bed to steal the hollow shell of my marriage. Congratulations. You won him. He is entirely yours. Enjoy your prize. Without waiting for her to utter another pathetic excuse, I grabbed the heavy brass handle of my door. Amber reached out, screaming my name, but I slammed the solid steel door forward with tremendous force. The heavy latch clicked perfectly into place, instantly cutting off the sounds of her sobbing and the relentless wailing of her infant twins. I engaged the deadbolt, turned the security chain, and walked calmly back to my kitchen island. My espresso was still perfectly warm. The transaction was complete, the ledger was closed, and I had a very important phone call to make to my brother-in-law. I immediately dialed Jamal. He answered on the second ring, working late at his law office. I bypassed standard greetings, delivering the unvarnished facts of Amber's porch confession. I relayed the $50,000 medical bribe, the anonymous donor fertilization, and Cynthia's manipulation of her son's permanent sterility. For a long moment, the line went dead. Jamal took a slow, deep breath, digesting the unfiltered toxicity of his mother-in-law's actions. He always knew Cynthia was a manipulative narcissist, but purchasing donor sperm to breed a fake heir crossed into an unparalleled level of sociopathy. I told him I needed access to every single piece of public data connected to Howard's investment firm and Cynthia's various vanity projects. Within 10 minutes, Jamal granted me secure portal access to a mountain of legal filings, property deeds, and corporate registry documents he had quietly compiled to monitor their shady dealings. Transforming my dining room into a financial war room, I connected my encrypted laptop to 3 monitors and pulled up the data dump. Forensic accounting is not magic. It is the meticulous, relentless pursuit of anomalies. Howard and Cynthia believed wealth made them invisible to scrutiny, assuming complicated channels erased the origin point. But every transaction leaves a digital ghost. Cynthia told Amber the $50,000 payout was untraceable cash. That was an amateur assumption. Withdrawing $50,000 triggers mandatory banking alerts. The money had to originate from somewhere, and I was going to follow the breadcrumbs straight back to the rotten core of their fake empire. I began my search by cross-referencing the exact dates Amber initiated her in vitro fertilization treatments. I combed through Howard's primary business filings, looking for any corresponding liquidity events. Initially, the ledgers appeared perfectly balanced, reflecting standard investment firm operations. But when I applied advanced variance analysis software to scan for irregular expenditure patterns, a massive red flag illuminated my center screen. A vendor payment of $50,000 had been authorized precisely 2 weeks prior to Amber's first clinical appointment. The recipient was an obscure Cayman Islands consulting group designed exclusively to wash dirty money. I eagerly dove straight into this deep digital abyss. With Jamal providing legal registry cross-checks, I unraveled a staggering web of financial deception. The $50,000 payout was merely a single loose thread on a massive sweater woven entirely from fraud. As I pulled that thread, the entire facade of Howard's prestigious investment firm unraveled before my eyes. He was not a successful financier. He was running a sophisticated shell game. I uncovered dozens of offshore wire transfers, heavily inflated expense reports, and blatant tax evasion schemes spanning the last 8 years. Howard had been secretly funneling his clients' investment returns into private offshore accounts to maintain his and Cynthia's lavish suburban lifestyle. They were drowning in debt, just like Donovan, and actively stealing to keep the country club facade intact. But the most disgusting discovery was yet to come. I traced the specific origin account that funded the Cayman Islands wire transfer. The money had not come from a private family trust or a standard business revenue stream. It was routed directly from a charitable foundation Howard and Cynthia ostensibly managed. The foundation was supposedly dedicated to providing educational grants for underprivileged youth in Chicago. Cynthia frequently hosted extravagant self-congratulatory luncheons to solicit donations for this specific charity. Instead of funding scholarships, Cynthia had deliberately embezzled $50,000 of charity money to purchase an anonymous donor pregnancy for a bankrupt lifestyle blogger. She had literally stolen from disadvantaged children to finance a biological weapon against my marriage. The sheer audacity of the crime was breathtaking. Misappropriation of charitable funds is a severe federal offense carrying massive financial penalties and significant prison time. I did not feel shock or anger. I felt the cold, thrilling surge of absolute victory. Over the next 48 hours, I barely slept. I drank countless cups of black coffee, meticulously compiling every single piece of evidence into an airtight, digitally encrypted dossier. I organized the offshore transfer logs, the false charity ledgers, the property deeds, and the communication records into a flawless, irrefutable narrative of federal tax evasion and charity fraud. I highlighted the exact routing numbers linking the stolen education funds to the cash payout Cynthia delivered to Amber. I was not simply building a file to humiliate them at their next country club gathering. Gossip fades and social embarrassment can be spun or denied by pathological liars. I was preparing to legally annihilate them. I structured the dossier to meet the exact filing standards of the Internal Revenue Service Whistleblower Office. The document was a perfectly lethal weapon primed and ready to detonate. Jamal reviewed the final compilation via our secure channel, sending back a single message confirming that the evidence was completely bulletproof and ready for deployment. I leaned back in my ergonomic desk chair, rubbing my extremely tired eyes as the early morning sun broke beautifully over the sprawling Chicago skyline. The complete financial execution of my former in-laws was now fully prepared, sitting quietly on a highly secure flash drive right on my desk. They had spent years treating me like an uncultured outsider looking down on my career, while secretly using stolen charity funds to fake their elite status. They thought their stolen money made them completely untouchable. They had no idea that I now held the precise coordinates for an absolute, unrecoverable legal strike against their entire existence. I carefully closed my laptop with a very satisfying snap. Howard and Cynthia's absolute destruction was practically guaranteed. But before I unleashed the full weight of the federal government on their fraudulent empire, I had to watch the first phase of my retaliation unfold. The legal rescission period for the birth certificates was rapidly closing, and Donovan was about to discover the true crushing weight of the trap he had so proudly signed his name to. In the state of Illinois, a man who signs a voluntary acknowledgement of paternity has exactly 60 days to rescind his signature. The legal countdown began the very second Donovan proudly scrawled his name across those hospital documents and paraded them into family court. I tracked that specific deadline with the same obsessive precision I applied to corporate tax audits. I marked the calendar in my penthouse, watching the days tick down, while Donovan remained completely oblivious to the ticking time bomb strapped to his financial future. When midnight struck on the 60th day, the steel jaws of American family law snapped shut permanently. By failing to request a genetic test prior to the deadline, Donovan legally bound himself to those anonymous donor infants. He was now financially responsible for 2 children for the next 18 years. Biological reality no longer mattered to the court system. He had claimed them, and the state was happy to hold him accountable. Amber, facing imminent eviction and possessing zero income, had immediately applied for state welfare assistance. When a mother applies for government aid, the state automatically triggers aggressive child support enforcement against the registered father to recoup their costs. The Department of Healthcare and Family Services does not simply politely ask for contributions. They act with ruthless mechanical efficiency. They initiated an immediate wage garnishment order against Donovan, calculating a massive monthly support obligation based on the inflated executive salary he previously bragged about. They had no idea I had already orchestrated his termination for corporate embezzlement. When the state collection agency attempted to garnish his paychecks and found zero active income, they escalated their collection tactics. The bureaucracy of the Child Support Division operates without mercy, transforming Donovan into a priority target for asset recovery. The dominoes I had carefully aligned began falling with spectacular velocity. Because Donovan was unemployed, the child support arrears accumulated at an astonishing rate. Combining his massive new child support debt with the $120,000 in high-interest credit card debt he gladly accepted during our divorce created an inescapable financial singularity. The collection agencies and the state government initiated a coordinated assault on his remaining assets. Without any warning, his personal checking and savings accounts were completely frozen. He went to buy a cup of coffee and his debit card declined. He attempted to withdraw cash, and the automated teller machine swallowed his card. The state placed aggressive liens against anything possessing his name. They seized the modest emergency fund he had managed to scrape together by begging his former country club friends for loans. He was instantly transformed into a financial ghost, stripped of his purchasing power and legally tethered to a bankrupt mistress who despised him. The absolute magnitude of his ruin finally pierced his thick, arrogant skull. When reality hit him, he did not turn to Cynthia or his bargain bin divorce attorney. He turned to the only person who had ever provided him with actual stability. My phone began vibrating relentlessly on my kitchen island. I ignored the first 7 calls, watching his caller identification flash across the screen before sending them straight to voicemail. On the 8th attempt, I opened my audio application and pressed play. His voice filled my pristine, sunlit kitchen. It was not the smug, triumphant tone he had projected in the courtroom. It was the sound of a man who had stepped off a cliff and realized he forgot his parachute. "Sydney, please pick up the phone," he sobbed, his breathing ragged. "You have to help me. They took everything. The bank locked my accounts. The state is demanding thousands of dollars every single month for kids that are not even mine." Amber told me the truth about the anonymous donor. "My mother lied to me my whole life. I am completely sterile, Sydney. I cannot pay this. I am unemployed. You have to use your forensic skills to fix this. You know how to find legal loopholes. You know how to audit these systems. Please just look at the paperwork. Prove to the judge I was defrauded. I will do anything you want. I am begging you." I leaned back against the marble of my kitchen counter, holding a cup of espresso. I listened to his pathetic, ragged breathing filter through the speaker of my phone. He was genuinely expecting the competent, dutiful wife to swoop in and rescue him from his own stupidity. He thought my professional expertise was a free resource he could activate whenever his ego wrote checks his bank account could not cash. He wanted me to untangle a legal disaster he had eagerly orchestrated specifically to cause me emotional pain. I took a sip of my espresso, savoring the flavor profile. I played the second voicemail. He was audibly weeping now, his words slurring together, as he described sleeping in his friend's basement because he could not even afford a motel room. He detailed the humiliation of standing in line at a local food pantry, terrified that his former colleagues might recognize him. He begged me to remember the good times we shared, ignoring the fact that he had spent the last year secretly funneling my hard-earned equity into Amber's designer handbag collection. I deleted the pathetic voicemails with a single swipe of my finger. I did not text him back. I did not block his number yet because I wanted his unhinged messages to serve as a digital archive of his absolute destruction. Donovan was experiencing the precise, unyielding mathematical reality of consequence. He had wanted a ready-made family to boost his hollow pride, and now he was legally indentured to that exact family until he reached 50 years old. I set my espresso cup down and walked toward my home office to prepare for my day, perfectly content. The child support trap had finally closed around his neck perfectly. While Donovan suffocated under inescapable child support obligations, a volatile panic brewed within his parents' estate. Howard and Cynthia were in absolute meltdown mode. Their pristine facade was fracturing under the strain of their toxic machinations. Cynthia paced her grand living room, her designer heels clicking frantically. She realized Amber was a massive liability. The destitute former blogger possessed direct knowledge of the $50,000 medical bribe, the anonymous donor fertilization, and the ultimate deception regarding Donovan's sterility. Cynthia decided to handle the situation using the only tactic she truly understood. She attempted to bully her target into absolute silence through overwhelming financial intimidation. Howard hired an unethical defense attorney to draft a terrifying lawsuit against Amber accusing her of extortion. They dispatched a process server to ambush Amber at her squalid apartment, threatening her with total financial ruin if she dared to speak a single word about the fertility clinic payout. Cynthia believed overwhelming legal force would easily crush a desperate single mother. She severely underestimated the sophisticated network of retaliation I had constructed. When Amber received the intimidating legal packet, she panicked and contacted me. I did not respond. Instead, I forwarded her desperate messages directly to Jamal. Jamal was a brilliant attorney who operated with surgical precision, and he was more than happy to act as my shadow ally. He despised his mother-in-law and recognized a blatant legal abuse. Acting entirely behind the scenes, Jamal routed instructions to Amber through an encrypted proxy email. He provided her with the exact legal templates required to file a devastating counter-harassment order against Howard and Cynthia, citing specific statutes regarding witness intimidation. When Cynthia's attorney received Amber's perfectly formatted counterfiling, he advised his wealthy clients to back down. Pursuing the extortion lawsuit would require a grueling discovery process, forcing them to submit banking records to a judge and publicly expose the $50,000 payout. Cynthia hit a massive brick wall. She reviewed the documents Amber had submitted to the court, her eyes narrowing as she analyzed the highly technical legal phrasing. Cynthia recognized the structural cadence of the legal arguments. It perfectly matched the corporate litigation style of her own son-in-law. The realization hit Cynthia with the force of a freight train. She connected the dots instantly, deducing that Jamal and I were secretly communicating and actively working together to dismantle her family. Enraged, Cynthia summoned Jamal and Brittany to the suburban mansion for a mandatory family dinner, framing it as an urgent strategy meeting. Jamal and Brittany arrived precisely on time. Howard sat at the head of the dining room table, looking utterly exhausted. Cynthia did not even wait for the catered food to be served before launching her vicious attack. She slammed her fist on the mahogany table, making the crystal glassware rattle. "You are a traitor!" Cynthia shrieked, pointing a trembling finger at Jamal. "I know you helped that pathetic girl file those court documents. I know you have been conspiring with Sydney behind our backs. We welcomed you into our home, we allowed you to marry our daughter, and you repay our generosity by colluding with discarded ex-wives." Jamal did not flinch or raise his voice. He slowly picked up his linen napkin, wiped his mouth, and looked at his mother-in-law with profound clinical disgust. He had spent years enduring her thinly veiled contempt, and he was finally ready to deliver his verdict. "You did not welcome me into this family," Cynthia Jamal stated with unwavering authority. "You tolerated my presence because my income bracket matched your country club requirements. Do not pretend I have forgotten the countless racist microaggressions you directed at me over the past decade. I remember you asking if my law degree was a diversity quota. I remember you telling your friends you were surprised Brittany brought home a man from my specific background. I endured your toxic bigotry solely out of love for my wife, but my allegiance has always been to the law, not this house." Cynthia gasped, clutching the pearls at her throat. Howard tried to interject, but Jamal silenced him with a single sharp look. "Do not speak to me about loyalty," Jamal continued, standing up to tower over the table. "You secretly embezzled $50,000 from an educational charity fund to purchase anonymous donor sperm. You actively orchestrated the destruction of your own son's marriage to protect a medical lie about his sterility. You treat people like disposable assets. I am not betraying this family, Cynthia. I am simply refusing to defend a fraudulent syndicate." Cynthia turned to her daughter, expecting support. "Brittany, are you going to let your husband speak to your mother this way?" Brittany stood up, her posture incredibly resolute. She looked at her parents with absolute revulsion. "Jamal is right," Brittany declared, her voice trembling with anger. "You are toxic and cruel. You ruined Donovan's life by hiding his medical history, and you tried to ruin Sydney out of pure spite. I am entirely disgusted to share your bloodline. You are dead to me. Do not ever contact us again." Brittany grabbed Jamal's hand, and together they turned their backs on the shattered remnants of her family. They walked out the front door, leaving Cynthia screaming hysterically, while Howard stared blankly at the wall, completely paralyzed by the realization that he had just lost his only daughter. 20 miles away, sitting in the pristine silence of my downtown penthouse, my phone screen illuminated with a brief text message from Jamal. "The family unit has completely imploded," the message read. "You are clear to proceed." I smiled, turning my attention back to the glowing monitors on my desk. The comprehensive, digitally encrypted dossier detailing Howard and Cynthia's massive tax evasion and charity embezzlement was perfectly formatted. Every fraudulent transaction was highlighted, every offshore wire transfer traced, and every piece of illegal activity definitively proven. I moved my cursor over the submission portal for the Internal Revenue Service whistleblower office. With a single decisive click of my mouse, I finalized the upload. The absolute annihilation of my former in-laws was now in motion. The echoing click of my heels against the cold concrete of the underground executive parking garage was the only sound cutting through the evening silence. I had stayed late at the office finalizing the last encrypted security protocols on the whistleblower submission. My mind was sharp buzzing with the clinical satisfaction of a perfectly executed audit. I approached my reserved parking space, unlocking my sleek luxury sedan with a quick press of my key fob. The headlights flashed, illuminating a shadowy figure stepping out from behind a massive concrete pillar. I froze my hand, instinctively dropping to the heavy canister of pepper spray in my coat pocket. The figure staggered forward into the harsh fluorescent lighting. It was Donovan. The man standing before me was a grotesque caricature of the arrogant executive who had swaggered into the divorce court just months prior. His designer suit was completely gone, replaced by a stained, wrinkled jacket and a shirt missing 2 buttons. He looked like he had not slept or shaved in weeks. His eyes were bloodshot, completely sunken into dark, bruised sockets, and he reeked of stale sweat and absolute desperation. He held his hands up in a frantic, placating gesture, his palms trembling visibly under the artificial lights. "Sydney, please, do not call security," Donovan begged, his voice cracking violently. "I just need to talk to you. I had to wait here. They blocked my number. Everyone blocked my number. I have absolutely nobody else to turn to." I did not loosen my grip on the pepper spray. I kept my physical distance, analyzing his erratic movements. "You are trespassing on private corporate property, Donovan," I stated, my tone devoid of a single ounce of empathy. "You have exactly 30 seconds to state your business before I trigger the panic alarm on my keys and have you arrested." He swallowed hard, taking a desperate, shaky breath. "I need you to testify for me in family court. You have to come to the hearing next week. You are a forensic accountant. You know how to trace timelines and prove fraud. You can tell the judge that my mother and Amber colluded to trap me. You can testify that I was under extreme psychological duress during the divorce and that I was completely manipulated into signing those birth certificates. If you testify as an expert witness, the judge might rescind the paternity order. You are the only person smart enough to untangle this legal nightmare." I stared at him, letting the sheer breathtaking audacity of his request hang in the damp air of the garage. He had orchestrated a devastating betrayal, flaunted his infidelity, and attempted to leave me with a mountain of fraudulent debt. Now, facing the catastrophic consequences of his own arrogance, he expected me to act as his personal legal savior. I let out a short, hollow laugh that echoed sharply off the concrete walls. "You want me to commit perjury by claiming you were under duress?" I replied, stepping slightly closer so he could see the absolute 0-degree temperature in my eyes. "You were not under duress, Donovan. You were euphoric. You marched into that courtroom vibrating with unchecked ego. You practically ripped the pen out of your lawyer's hand because you were so desperate to secure your new life." "Sydney, I was lied to!" he shrieked, his voice bouncing off the concrete pillars. "My own mother hid my medical records. She bought donor sperm. She bought my mistress. I am completely sterile. Those screaming babies are not mine. I am the victim of a massive financial conspiracy." "You are the victim of your own pathological vanity," I corrected him, instantly raising my hand to cut off his pathetic whining. "Do you remember what you told me in that hospital room? Do you remember what you shouted for the entire courtroom to hear? You said you finally had a real family. You said you were building a legacy that I was too selfish to give you. You wanted to play the wealthy, fertile patriarch so badly that you blindly signed a binding legal contract without demanding a single genetic test." I took another step forward, forcing him to back up against the dirty concrete pillar. "Let us talk numbers, Donovan, since you came seeking my professional expertise. Let us break down the exact mathematical reality of your new real family. You signed a voluntary acknowledgement of paternity. By doing so, you legally bypassed all biological requirements. The state of Illinois now views you as the sole financial provider for 2 infants until they reach the age of 18. Donovan squeezed his eyes shut, shaking his head frantically, as if trying to physically block out my words. "Please stop," he whimpered. I did not stop. I amplified my volume, delivering the data with ruthless precision. 2 children require base child support, which the state calculates automatically. Add mandatory health insurance premiums, which you no longer have access to through a corporate employer. Add childcare costs, basic educational fees, and standard inflation over the next 2 decades. According to the state guidelines, your total minimum financial obligation will exceed $800,000. A choked, agonizing sob ripped from his throat. And you are currently unemployed. I continued, my voice acting as the final nail in his coffin. You carry over $120,000 in high-interest credit card debt that you gleefully accepted during our divorce. Your bank accounts are frozen by state collection agencies. Your wages will be garnished at a maximum penalty rate the second you secure even a minimum wage job. You cannot declare bankruptcy on child support arrears, Donovan. This debt will follow you into your grave. You traded your actual marriage for an 18-year financial prison sentence. The absolute crushing reality of his situation completely broke him. The last remaining shred of his fabricated ego disintegrated. Donovan collapsed. He fell hard onto his knees on the greasy, oil-stained concrete floor of the parking garage. He buried his face in his dirty hands, weeping with loud, ugly, heaving sobs that echoed pathetically through the empty space. He was a ruined, hollow shell of a man utterly destroyed by the exact weapon he had tried to use against me. I looked down at his trembling, broken form. I felt no pity. I felt no remorse. I felt only the immaculate satisfaction of a perfectly balanced equation. I turned my back on him. I opened the door of my luxury sedan, sliding into the pristine leather interior. I started the engine, the powerful hum drowning out the sound of his relentless crying. I did not roll down the window. I did not offer a single word of comfort. I simply shifted the car into drive and accelerated toward the exit, leaving the man who tried to destroy my life weeping in the rearview mirror. The taillights of my luxury sedan sliced through the cool Chicago night as I merged onto the expressway. The image of Donovan sobbing on the grease-stained concrete faded into the rearview mirror, replaced by the glittering urban skyline ahead. My pulse was steady, drumming with the quiet satisfaction of absolute closure. My phone chimed through the car audio system, breaking the silence. It was Jamal. I accepted the call, the crisp sound of his voice filling the cabin. He did not waste time with pleasantries. He possessed the same lethal efficiency I did. Jamal informed me that the financial panic within Howard and Cynthia's mansion had reached a critical mass. The walls were closing in on their fraudulent investment firm, and their creditors were circling like sharks. In a desperate, wildly arrogant attempt to project an illusion of untouchable wealth, Cynthia had orchestrated a massive black-tie charity gala at the highly exclusive Oak Ridge Country Club. The gala was scheduled for the following Saturday night. Jamal explained, his tone laced with clinical disgust. Cynthia had branded the event as a grand philanthropic fundraiser for the same educational charity they used to launder Amber's $50,000 anonymous donor payout. It was a spectacular smokescreen. Howard and Cynthia planned to pack the country club ballroom with Chicago's most elite high society investors. Their true objective was to aggressively solicit new capital under the guise of charitable donations and exclusive investment portfolios. They needed a massive, immediate injection of cash to plug the gaping holes in their offshore ledgers before the state regulators came knocking. They believed that if they threw a party lavish enough, if the champagne was expensive enough, nobody would look closely at the underlying math. They intended to steal from their wealthiest friends to delay their inevitable bankruptcy. I gripped the leather steering wheel, my mind instantly mapping the variables of this new development. Cynthia was attempting a classic Ponzi maneuver, using the blinding glare of social prestige to mask profound financial decay. She was setting a trap for Chicago's elite, relying entirely on the assumption that wealth inherently equals trustworthiness. I told Jamal that we could not simply let them execute this final desperate scam. The digital dossier I had prepared for the Internal Revenue Service whistleblower office was completely airtight and waiting for processing, but bureaucratic justice moves slowly. If Cynthia secured those investments on Saturday night, she might temporarily hide the stolen funds and drag the legal proceedings out for years. We needed to orchestrate an absolute, unavoidable public catastrophe. We needed to detonate the evidence directly in front of her targets. I arrived at my penthouse, booted up my encrypted workstation, and navigated directly to the Oak Ridge Country Club's event registration portal. Cynthia was notoriously obsessed with status and corporate sponsorship. She craved validation from powerful institutions. Thanks to my recent promotion to Director of Forensic Accounting, my bank accounts were flush with a massive executive bonus. I did not purchase a standard ticket. I utilized my corporate firm's credentials to secure the Platinum Tier VIP table, positioned directly at the front of the grand ballroom. I paid the exorbitant registration fee in full, transferring the funds instantly. By purchasing the table under the banner of a major, highly respected financial institution, I created an impenetrable social shield. Cynthia, desperate for corporate prestige and desperate for cash, could not legally or socially afford to deny a platinum corporate sponsor. I had essentially bought my way onto the front lines of her battlefield, and she had zero authority to refuse my entry. The following evening, Jamal and Brittany arrived at my penthouse for a strategic coordination meeting. We gathered around my marble kitchen island, spreading out digital blueprints of the Oak Ridge Country Club that Brittany had quietly obtained from her previous years attending family events there. Brittany pointed out the main security checkpoints, the catering entrances, and the exact placement of the podium where her father would deliver his keynote solicitation speech. She was completely resolute, possessing an intense righteous anger toward the parents who had prioritized vanity over human decency. Jamal outlined the legal parameters of our infiltration, ensuring that our presence at the event remained entirely lawful under the terms of my corporate sponsorship. We were not crashing a private party. We were authorized high-level guests. We synchronized our watches and established a precise timeline of execution. Jamal detailed a specific security vulnerability near the South Service entrance, a blind spot commonly utilized by valet staff during large events. We needed an access point for an uninvited, highly volatile variable we planned to introduce at the perfect moment. I pulled up the financial dossier on my monitors, organizing the most damning pieces of evidence into streamlined, easily readable summary sheets. The offshore wire transfers, the fake charity ledgers, and the medical bribe receipts were all condensed into explosive, undeniable facts. I printed multiple copies, sealing them inside premium manila folders. We were going to hijack Cynthia's crowning social achievement and turn her desperate vanity project into a highly publicized execution. As Jamal and Brittany left my apartment that night, the air felt charged with electric anticipation. Cynthia and Howard were currently polishing their designer shoes and rehearsing their fraudulent investment pitches, firmly convinced they were about to secure their salvation. They thought the walls of their prestigious country club would insulate them from the consequences of their spectacular cruelty. They had absolutely no idea that the architect of their destruction had just bought a front-row seat to their final performance. The stage was perfectly set, the weapons were loaded, and the elite society of Chicago was about to witness the most devastating audit in the history of the North Shore. The doors of the Oak Ridge Country Club swung open, releasing the scent of expensive floral arrangements into the cool autumn air. I stepped out of the black car, my heels striking the pavement with deliberate authority. I wore a floor-length emerald gown that commanded immediate attention, an architectural masterpiece of silk projecting absolute power. Flanked by Jamal in a midnight blue tuxedo, and Brittany radiating fierce confidence in a sleek black dress, we moved past the valet stand like an invading army. The grand ballroom was a glittering sea of crystal chandeliers and affluent socialites. Waitstaff circulated with silver trays of champagne, completely unaware that the ground beneath this opulent display was hollow. We paused at the entrance, allowing the gravity of our arrival to ripple through the crowd. It took 45 seconds for Cynthia to spot us. She was standing near a towering ice sculpture, gripping a crystal flute, desperately working the room to solicit the fraudulent investments she badly needed to avoid federal prison. The moment her eyes locked onto mine, the artificial smile melted off her face, replaced by a mask of unfiltered panic. She excused herself from a group of wealthy donors and marched directly toward the club's general manager. I watched with cold amusement as Cynthia pointed a trembling finger in our direction. I could read her lips from across the room. She was demanding our immediate removal, desperately whispering that I was a bitter, discarded ex-wife who had come to ruin their prestigious charity event. The general manager nodded gravely, adjusting his lapels, and approached us with two burly security guards in tow. Cynthia followed closely behind him, a smug, victorious smirk crawling back onto her face as she anticipated my public humiliation. "Excuse me, madame," the manager stated, projecting his voice to draw the attention of surrounding guests. "I must ask you and your party to leave the premises immediately. This is an exclusive private fundraising event, and you are not on the approved guest list." Cynthia crossed her arms, vibrating with triumphant energy. "You heard him, Sydney?" She sneered, her voice dripping with venom. "This is a high society charity gala, not a shelter for jealous women who cannot accept that my son moved on to a better life. Take your petty resentment and get out of my club before you embarrass yourself any further." I did not flinch. I did not raise my voice. I smoothly reached into my emerald clutch and withdrew a solid metal card, dropping it casually onto the silver tray a passing waiter was holding. The sharp clatter drew the manager's immediate attention. It was the Platinum Corporate Sponsor Card, issued by my global financial firm, bearing my name and title. I am the Director of Forensic Accounting for the institution that purchased the primary VIP table for tonight's event. I informed the manager, my voice dropping to a freezing professional register. "I paid the $40,000 registration fee in full yesterday. If you deny entry to your largest corporate sponsor based on the hysterical ramblings of a woman currently running a fraudulent charity, my legal counsel standing right beside me will ensure this establishment faces a massive discrimination lawsuit by Monday morning." The manager stared at the heavy metal card, the color rapidly draining from his face. He recognized the name of my firm instantly. It was an institution that managed the wealth of half the people in that ballroom. He swallowed hard, immediately signaling the security guards to stand down. "My profound apologies, Director," the manager stammered, bowing his head in total submission. "There has clearly been a terrible misunderstanding. Please allow me to personally escort you to your table." Cynthia stood paralyzed, her jaw slack, completely humiliated as the manager she had weaponized against me folded. The surrounding high society guests, the exact people Cynthia desperately needed money from, had witnessed the exchange. They noted the platinum card. They registered the deference the manager showed me. In the opportunistic ecosystem of the elite, power is an irresistible magnet. As the manager escorted us to the massive VIP table directly at the front of the stage, Cynthia's wealthy friends immediately began flocking to our seats. They were eager to network with a senior director from a top-tier financial firm. They handed me business cards, completely ignoring Cynthia, who stood seething by the ice sculpture, watching her primary investment targets pivot their attention to the woman she had just tried to throw out on the street. The shift in the power dynamic was immediate and absolute. I took my seat, accepting a glass of sparkling water, when a flash of movement near the catering doors caught my eye. A man wearing a cheap, ill-fitting black uniform and carrying a stack of dirty appetizer plates was desperately trying to duck behind a large floral arrangement. It was Donovan. The catastrophic debt he had blindly accepted during the divorce had ruined his credit, rendering him unemployable in the corporate sector. The only income he could secure was working as a lowly minimum-wage event coordinator assistant for the country club. The man who had strutted through family court, pretending to be a wealthy patriarch, was now clearing my dirty dishes. Donovan peered around the orchids, his eyes meeting mine. The sheer staggering weight of his absolute degradation crashed down upon him. He saw me sitting at the platinum sponsor table, surrounded by the elite investors he used to pretend he belonged with, flanked by the sister and brother-in-law who had disowned his family. He saw the expensive emerald gown, the effortless power I commanded in the room, and he looked down at his stained catering uniform. His face burned bright red with an agonizing, paralyzing shame. He dropped his gaze to the floor and scurried back into the kitchen, swinging doors, terrified to be seen thoroughly broken by the reality of his new existence. The tension in the grand ballroom had reached a suffocating boiling point. Cynthia was hyperventilating near the stage, realizing she was rapidly losing control of her fraudulent operation. Her targets were distracted. Her son was hiding in the kitchen like a frightened rat, and the architect of her destruction was sitting in the front row, calmly waiting for the main event to begin. I glanced at my watch. It was almost time for Howard to deliver his keynote address. I looked over at Jamal, who offered a sharp, lethal nod. The perimeter was secure, the VIPs were seated, and the final explosive variable was right on schedule. Howard tapped the microphone, the sharp electronic feedback echoing across the crystal-draped ballroom. The room instantly fell into a polite, expectant hush. He stood at the center of the grand elevated stage, adjusting his silk tie, projecting the practiced, trustworthy aura of a seasoned financial titan. Behind him, Cynthia beamed with absolute radiance, finally stepping back into her element. She had recovered her pristine posture, ready to collect the massive influx of checks that would allegedly save their fraudulent empire. Howard began his keynote address, speaking eloquently about philanthropic duty, educational legacy, and the exclusive high-yield investment opportunities available only to the elite circle gathered in the room tonight. He played the crowd perfectly, weaving a masterful deceptive narrative of generational wealth and unyielding family integrity. At our VIP table, Jamal leaned toward me, sliding his smartphone discreetly across the white linen tablecloth. The screen displayed a single encrypted text message sent to an unknown number exactly 20 minutes earlier. The message contained nothing but the exact location of the South Service entrance and the specific time the security guards rotated their patrol. Jamal had deliberately propped that heavy steel door open by a fraction of an inch, creating a flawless point of entry for the chaos we engineered. Howard raised his hands, building toward his grand solicitation pitch, asking the wealthy patrons to open their checkbooks for the children. Before he could utter another syllable, a deafening crash shattered the elegant atmosphere. The heavy mahogany double doors at the rear of the ballroom violently flew open, slamming against the plaster walls with explosive force. Amber stormed into the pristine room. She was practically vibrating with unhinged feral rage, violently shoving her cheap plastic double stroller over the imported Persian rugs. The wheels caught and dragged, making a terrible screeching noise that cut through the absolute silence of the stunned crowd. The two donor infants strapped inside the stroller were wailing at the top of their lungs, adding a chaotic, piercing siren to her dramatic entrance. Amber did not care about the hundreds of millionaires staring at her. She did not care about the strict black tie dress code. She was wearing the exact same stained gray sweatshirt and scuffed sneakers she wore on my front porch. She marched directly down the center aisle, her eyes locked onto the stage with laser focus. Howard froze, his mouth hanging open mid-sentence. Cynthia let out a strangled, terrified gasp, clutching the sides of the wooden podium so tightly her knuckles turned entirely white. "Where is your deadbeat, fraudulent son?" Amber shrieked, her voice amplified by the sheer acoustics of the massive ballroom. Her tone was pure, unfiltered venom, completely destroying the polite ambiance of the gala. "I want my money. You promised me a luxury lifestyle. You promised me unlimited funds. Instead, you stuck me with a bankrupt, sterile liar who cannot even afford to buy formula for the children you paid me to have." The entire ballroom erupted into a cacophony of shocked whispers. Wealthy socialites gasped, dropping their expensive champagne flutes onto the tables. Corporate investors leaned forward, their eyes widening at the scandalous, grotesque allegations being hurled across the room. Amber kept pushing the stroller forward, pointing an accusing finger directly at Cynthia. "You think you can just buy human beings and discard them when your bank accounts dry up?" Amber yelled, her voice cracking with hysterical desperation. "Your son is a pathetic coward. He is hiding in the kitchen right now, clearing dirty plates because he was fired for corporate embezzlement. He is completely broke. His bank accounts are totally frozen. He owes me thousands of dollars in mandated child support, and he is dodging the collection agencies like a common criminal." Two security guards finally snapped out of their paralyzed shock and sprinted down the aisle toward her. They grabbed Amber by the arms, trying to physically restrain her and pull her away from the stage. Amber fought back fiercely, thrashing against their strong grip, refusing to be silenced by anyone in the room. "Let me go!" Amber screamed, digging her heels into the expensive carpet as the guards dragged her backward. Tell them the truth, Cynthia. Tell all your rich friends how you are actually broke. Tell them how Donovan is legally trapped paying for babies that do not even share his DNA because you are too ashamed to admit he is entirely sterile. Tell them how you ruined my life to protect your fake country club image and your absolutely pathetic hollow legacy. On the stage, Howard and Cynthia looked like they had been struck by lightning. They were entirely paralyzed by the monumental public execution of their social standing. Cynthia stared out at the crowd, her face a mask of absolute horror, unable to formulate a single coherent denial. She watched as the elite investors, the exact people she needed to scam to avoid federal prison, reached into their tailored jackets and designer purses. Hundreds of smartphone cameras were suddenly raised into the air. The bright flashes illuminated the grand ballroom like a relentless strobe light. Chicago's highest society was actively recording every single second of the spectacular, humiliating disaster. The illusion of the untouchable wealthy family was evaporating on camera, instantly broadcasted to the digital world. I sat at my platinum sponsor table watching the chaotic, beautiful destruction unfold precisely according to our meticulous calculations. Jamal simply straightened his tie, his expression radiating absolute satisfaction. Brittany watched her parents' fraudulent empire burn without shedding a single tear. The ballroom was in total pandemonium, the air thick with scandal and the wailing of the infants. The ground had been completely cleared for me. The bewildered audience was perfectly primed. The carefully constructed facade of the family lay in absolute ruins upon the polished ballroom floor. Every lie they had told had collapsed. It was time for the forensic accountant to step up and deliver the final lethal blow to finish them. I stood up from the platinum sponsor table, smoothing the silk of my emerald gown. The grand ballroom was a swirling vortex of panicked whispers and frantic smartphone recordings, the perfect acoustic backdrop for an execution. I did not rush. I walked down the center aisle with the measured, deliberate pace of an auditor entering a hostile boardroom. The crowd parted instinctively, sensing the shift in atmospheric pressure. I climbed the 3 carpeted steps to the elevated stage. Howard was still frozen behind the wooden podium, his mouth opening and closing like a suffocating fish, utterly incapable of damage control. I stepped right into his personal space, maintaining unbroken predatory eye contact. I reached out and firmly wrapped my fingers around the sleek metal microphone. Howard offered absolutely zero resistance as I pulled it directly out of his trembling hands. I tapped the microphone once. The sharp, singular sound instantly silenced the remaining murmurs in the massive room. Every lens, every eye, every ounce of attention snapped directly to me. I did not yell. I did not let a single drop of emotion bleed into my voice. I projected the cold, terrifyingly professional tone of a woman about to deliver a fatal financial prognosis. "Good evening, distinguished guests," I announced, my voice echoing with crystal clarity over the high-fidelity sound system. "My name is Sydney. I am the Director of Forensic Accounting for the institution sponsoring the table directly in front of this stage. I am also the woman this family spent the last year attempting to financially and emotionally destroy." I raised my left hand, giving a precise, prearranged signal. Down on the ballroom floor, Jamal immediately went to work. Moving with lethal, elegant efficiency, my brilliant brother-in-law began distributing the thick manila folders we had prepared the night before. He handed them exclusively to the wealthiest, most influential donors seated at the premium tables, the exact venture capitalists and high society pillars Howard desperately needed to scam tonight. Jamal looked them right in the eyes as he placed the heavy, undeniable evidence directly onto their fine china plates. Brittany stood proudly by his side, glaring up at her parents with unwavering disgust. "I urge you to open those folders before you write a single check to this family," I instructed the elite crowd leaning casually against the mahogany podium. "You came here tonight under the impression that you are funding an educational initiative for underprivileged youth. That is a spectacular, highly calculated lie. The charity foundation Howard and Cynthia manage is nothing more than a sophisticated slush fund designed to mask their catastrophic insolvency." A collective gasp rippled through the front row as the city's top investors flipped open the dossiers. They stared at the highlighted bank statements and offshore routing numbers. If you look at page 3 of that packet, I continued enunciating every syllable with brutal precision. You will find the exact wire transfer logs from this charity account. You will see that exactly $50,000 of supposed educational grant money was illegally funneled through a Cayman Islands proxy. It did not go to scholarships. It went directly into the pockets of the woman who just screamed her way out of this building. Cynthia deliberately embezzled your philanthropic donations to purchase an anonymous donor pregnancy, entirely, to fabricate a biological heir for a son who is profoundly, irreversibly sterile. The ballroom erupted into a frenzy of shocked exclamations. People were pointing at Cynthia, who had collapsed onto a folding chair at the back of the stage, hiding her face in her manicured hands. Howard gripped the stage curtains, looking like he might physically vomit. Donovan contracted the mumps 12 years ago, resulting in absolute reproductive failure, I stated loudly, cutting through the rising noise. Cynthia hid his medical records to protect his fragile ego and paid a desperate blogger to undergo in vitro fertilization with stranger genetics. Her goal was to force me out of the family and secure a legacy. But her golden boy ruined the entire master plan. To spite me during our divorce, Donovan proudly signed a voluntary acknowledgement of paternity in open family court. He completely waived his right to a genetic test. He legally chained himself to 18 years of mandated child support for children who do not share a single drop of his DNA. I paused, letting the sheer staggering magnitude of their stupidity wash over the crowd of seasoned business minds. The investors were looking at the paperwork, pointing at the irrefutable evidence of the medical bribes and the resulting financial doom. And now, because Donovan is an unemployed corporate embezzler drowning in 6 figures of high-interest debt, he cannot pay the state-mandated support, I explained, driving the final nail deep into their coffin. His bank accounts are frozen, his wages are permanently garnished. This entire family is completely bankrupt. They threw this lavish gala to solicit your capital because they are currently facing an active, aggressive investigation by the Internal Revenue Service Whistleblower Office for massive tax evasion. If you invest a single dime with Howard tonight, you will be subpoenaed by federal agents before the end of the fiscal quarter. The reaction was instantaneous and violently chaotic. The grand ballroom descended into absolute pandemonium. Wealthy socialites scrambled out of their chairs, grabbing their expensive coats and designer purses, desperate to flee a sinking ship before the federal authorities arrived. The top-tier venture capitalists slammed the manila folders shut, their faces twisted in profound fury at realizing they were nearly caught in a massive federal fraud scheme. Several men began shouting directly at Howard, demanding immediate refunds for their past contributions and threatening severe legal retaliation. Cynthia was sobbing hysterically on the stage, rocking back and forth as the elite society she worshipped aggressively turned its back on her. Howard tried to approach the microphone to offer some pathetic, fabricated defense, but the crowd shouted him down with aggressive jeers and disgusted insults. The illusion of their untouchable generational wealth evaporated, completely exposing the hollow, rotting core of their existence to the exact demographic they relied upon for survival. I stepped back from the podium, leaving the microphone resting on the wooden surface. The execution was perfectly completed. The ledger was definitively closed. I walked calmly down the stage steps, joining Jamal and Brittany, who were standing tall amidst the frantic, fleeing crowd. We moved flawlessly toward the exit, leaving the blazing wreckage of their fraudulent empire completely consumed by the unforgiving fire of absolute, undeniable truth. The crisp autumn air felt infinitely cleaner as we stepped out of the country club and into the waiting town car. Jamal closed the door behind us, sealing away the muffled sounds of the catastrophe unfolding inside the grand ballroom. We drove away from the Oak Ridge estate in absolute silence, none of us needing to state the obvious. The surgical strike was a complete success. However, the true scale of the devastation did not manifest until the following 48 hours. The fallout was instantaneous and merciless. By the time my luxury sedan reached downtown Chicago, the digital landscape was already ablaze. The wealthy socialites and venture capitalists who had attended the gala wasted absolutely no time. They leveraged their vast networks, contacting their personal wealth managers and legal teams before they even reached their own driveways. The mass exodus of capital began immediately. Howard spent the entirety of Sunday trapped in his home office, desperately fielding calls from furious investors demanding the immediate liquidation and return of their assets. He attempted to deploy his usual charming rhetoric, offering hollow reassurances about temporary misunderstandings and disgruntled ex-wives. It was a futile effort. The men and women who had read my highly detailed forensic dossiers knew exactly what a federal tax evasion investigation entailed. They understood the terrifying implications of the charity fraud I had outlined. No amount of smooth talking could overwrite the stark, undeniable reality of the offshore routing numbers I had provided. When the stock markets opened on Monday morning, Howard's professional execution was finalized. His remaining business partners, men who had previously insulated him from scrutiny, aggressively severed all ties to avoid being pulled into the impending federal dragnet. They sent ruthless cease and desist letters, freezing him out of his own corporate servers and physically locking him out of the investment firm's downtown headquarters. In less than 2 days, the prestigious financial empire Howard had used to bludgeon his way through high society was reduced to a smoking radioactive crater. He was left completely isolated, staring down the barrel of massive class action lawsuits from defrauded clients alongside the looming threat of criminal prosecution. Yet the most violent explosion of the entire weekend did not occur in a corporate boardroom. It happened on the cold asphalt of the country club parking lot mere minutes after I had delivered the microphone drop on stage. As the ballroom descended into chaos, Donovan had remained hidden behind the swinging doors of the catering kitchen. He had listened to every single word of my speech through the service partition. The truth hit him with the devastating force of a physical blow. The absolute certainty of his sterility, the $50,000 medical bribe, the anonymous donor fertilization. The horrifying reality of his mother's profound sociopathic manipulation finally fractured the lifelong delusion he had comfortably inhabited. He realized with sickening clarity that Cynthia had not simply interfered in his marriage. She had actively robbed him of his most fundamental human right. She had stolen his bodily autonomy. She had deliberately concealed his medical history since he was an 18-year-old boy, treating his ignorance as a necessary sacrifice to preserve her pristine, superficial vanity. Donovan ripped off his cheap black catering apron, throwing it onto the greasy kitchen tiles. He stormed out of the service exit, his chest heaving with erratic, panicked breaths bursting into the chilly night air of the parking lot. Cynthia was stumbling across the pavement, clutching her designer gown, sobbing hysterically as she watched her wealthy friends speed away in their luxury vehicles. She looked completely pathetic, stripped of all her power and prestige. When she saw Donovan emerging from the shadows, her face lit up with desperate, clinging hope. She rushed toward him, extending her trembling arms, seeking comfort from the golden boy she had spent her entire life shielding from consequence. Donovan violently swatted her hands away, his eyes blazing with a feral, unhinged fury she had never seen before. He did not see a loving mother standing before him. He saw the architect of his absolute ruin. "Do not ever touch me again," Donovan roared, his voice echoing violently across the rows of parked cars. You knew I was sterile my entire adult life, and you deliberately hid my own medical records from me. You let me believe I was a healthy, capable man. You let me destroy a 10-year marriage to a woman who actually supported me just so you could buy fake grandchildren to show off at this pathetic country club. Cynthia recoiled, tears streaming through her ruined makeup. "Donovan, darling, please listen to me," she pleaded, her voice cracking under the weight of his hatred. "I did it to protect you. I knew how much being a father meant to you. I knew it would crush your spirit if you found out you were defective. I wanted to give you the family you deserved. Sydney was holding you back. I was trying to save you." "Save me!" Donovan screamed, stepping closer and forcing his mother to cower against the side of a parked vehicle. "You completely destroyed me. Because of your psychotic obsession with appearances, I signed a binding legal document claiming 2 children who share zero genetics with me. I am entirely bankrupt. I am unemployable. The state is permanently garnishing wages. I do not even have to pay child support to a woman who despises me. You did not protect me, Cynthia. You served me up on a silver platter to feed your own sick, twisted narcissism. Cynthia covered her mouth, unleashing a wailing sob. She reached out again, desperate to salvage the illusion of her maternal devotion. Please, my sweet boy. We will fix this. We will hire better lawyers. We will find a way out of this trap. There is no way out. Donovan spat the raw, crushing truth of his inescapable reality, completely overwhelming him. Sydney built an impenetrable cage, and you shoved me directly inside it. You are not a mother. You are a parasite. Everything you touch turns to absolute garbage. He looked at the woman who had coddled and corrupted him his entire existence. The golden boy illusion shattered completely, leaving behind nothing but a broke, indebted, and utterly broken man. I wish you were dead, Donovan stated, his voice dropping to a terrifying hollow register that held no room for forgiveness. I wish you had died before you ever had the chance to ruin my life. Without another word, Donovan turned his back on her. He broke into a frantic, desperate sprint, fleeing across the dark asphalt and disappearing into the dense tree line bordering the golf course. He ran blindly into the freezing night, possessing absolutely nothing but the crushing weight of his monumental debts and the realization of his own pathetic gullibility. Cynthia stood entirely alone in the vacant parking lot. The harsh security lights illuminated her total isolation. The crushing weight of her son's final, unforgiving condemnation struck her with absolute finality. Her knees buckled under the sheer gravity of her complete failure. She collapsed onto the hard, cold pavement, the expensive silk of her designer gown scraping against the rough gravel. Cynthia curled into a tight, trembling ball, weeping uncontrollably into her empty hands, screaming into the dark for the golden boy who would never, ever come back. 2 weeks passed with the quiet, methodical precision of a perfectly balanced ledger. The spectacular collapse at the country club was merely the social execution. The true structural annihilation required the formidable, unforgiving machinery of the federal government. My whistleblower dossier had triggered a priority classification within the Internal Revenue Service. When you hand federal agents a flawless roadmap of offshore tax evasion and charity fraud, complete with routing numbers and communication logs, they do not hesitate. They mobilized with breathtaking efficiency. On a crisp Tuesday morning, a fleet of dark government vehicles descended simultaneously upon Howard's downtown investment firm and their sprawling suburban estate. I was enjoying my morning espresso when Jamal texted me a live update. He was parked discreetly down the street from the mansion, watching the operation unfold. Federal agents wearing tactical windbreakers marched through the towering white pillars of Cynthia's prized home. They carried empty cardboard boxes ready to seize physical assets, hard drives, and every piece of financial documentation hidden within the property. Howard was handcuffed in his own mahogany study, the very room where he had confidently plotted the theft of educational grants. He attempted to leverage his usual country club charm, offering to call his political contacts, but federal investigators do not negotiate with embezzlers. The authorities charged him with multiple counts of wire fraud, tax evasion, and misappropriation of charitable funds. The government instantly froze every domestic and international account bearing his name. The severe penalties and back taxes eclipsed their remaining net worth. Cynthia was forced to stand on her manicured front lawn in a silk bathrobe. She watched helplessly as agents confiscated her luxury vehicles and cataloged her expensive jewelry to cover the immediate restitution orders. With their assets seized and their income completely eradicated, the mortgage on their heavily leveraged estate defaulted immediately. The bank swooped in, forcing a rapid short sale of the property to cover the outstanding debts. Cynthia and Howard were unceremoniously evicted from the epicenter of their social power. They were stripped of their club memberships, shunned by their elite circle, and left to navigate the brutal reality of their impending criminal trials from a cheap, cramped rental apartment on the outskirts of the city. The illusion of their generational wealth was legally and permanently erased. While his parents were systematically dismantled by the federal government, Donovan was fighting his own catastrophic legal battle in family court. Desperation had driven him to file an emergency petition to rescind his voluntary acknowledgement of paternity. He retained a low-tier public defender, having absolutely zero funds left to hire competent counsel. He walked into the courtroom looking entirely broken, his previous arrogance replaced by a frantic, sweating panic. I did not attend the hearing, but Jamal monitored the public docket and provided me with the precise details of the ruling. Donovan stood before a stern, no-nonsense family court judge and attempted to plead his case. He argued that he was the victim of a massive conspiracy orchestrated by his mother and his mistress. He presented his newly acquired medical records proving his irreversible sterility, weeping as he demanded the judge void the birth certificates and erase his financial obligations to Amber's twins. The judge listened to his frantic testimony with absolute indifference. In American family law, biological reality is frequently superseded by legal protocol. The judge looked down at the desperate man and delivered a brutally cold textbook ruling. She stated that Donovan had been completely aware of his rights when he signed the paternity acknowledgement. The legal forms clearly stipulated that he had the right to demand a genetic test prior to establishing legal fatherhood. Donovan had arrogantly waived that right. He had signed the documents voluntarily, eagerly, and without any coercion from the state. The judge firmly denied his petition to rescind. She ruled that his failure to request a DNA test before executing the legal document permanently bound him to the financial obligation. The 60-day rescission window had officially closed. The legal trap was locked, and the key was thrown away. The strike of the gavel echoed through the courtroom, sealing his fate. Donovan was now officially and legally trapped. He was permanently mandated to pay thousands of dollars in monthly child support for 2 infants generated from anonymous donor sperm. The state child support division did not care that he was unemployed. They did not care that he was drowning in the $120,000 of high-interest credit card debt I had saddled him with during our divorce. The accrual of his financial obligations continued with ruthless mathematical certainty. Because his bank accounts were entirely frozen, his arrears skyrocketed. The state automatically suspended his driver's license and revoked his passport. In our state, failing to pay mandated child support is not merely a civil matter. It carries severe criminal penalties. The judge issued a stark warning that if Donovan did not immediately begin making substantial payments toward his mounting arrears, he would be held in contempt of court. Contempt of court for unpaid child support results in mandatory jail time. Donovan had traded his stable, comfortable marriage for a catastrophic illusion. He was now facing the terrifying reality of incarceration simply because he could not fund the biological weapons his mother had deployed against me. Amber, utterly destitute and facing her own eviction, relentlessly hounded the state collection agencies to pursue him, turning the 2 former lovers into bitter, mutually assured destruction machines. I sat at the expansive desk in my downtown penthouse, reading the final court disposition Jamal had forwarded to my encrypted inbox. I felt a profound, immaculate sense of satisfaction. The dominoes had completely finished falling. Every single variable in the equation had resolved perfectly. I had utilized their own staggering greed and pathological vanity to engineer their absolute ruin. The legal annihilation of the people who had tried to destroy me was now officially complete. There was nothing left for them to take. I sat in my corner office staring at the pathetic digital pleas lingering on my computer screen. Donovan wanted to remember the good times over a cheap cup of coffee. Cynthia wanted me to miraculously wave away a federal indictment. They both sought absolution from the exact person they had aggressively tried to destroy. A lesser woman might have engaged. A weaker person might have drafted a scathing multi-page response outlining exactly why they deserved to rot in the financial and legal prisons they had built for themselves. I did absolutely nothing of the sort. Engaging with desperate toxic individuals only provides them with the oxygen they need to continue their manipulation. I refused to give them a single breath. I closed my laptop and left the office, taking the private elevator up to my newly purchased luxury penthouse. The late afternoon sun was beginning to dip below the towering Chicago skyline, casting a brilliant golden glow over the modern city architecture. I walked into my pristine state-of-the-art kitchen, reached into my climate-controlled wine fridge, and retrieved a highly exclusive, deeply complex bottle of vintage Cabernet Sauvignon. I poured the rich dark ruby liquid into a heavy crystal glass, enjoying the precise, elegant sound it made. I carried the glass out onto my expansive wraparound balcony. The wind blowing off Lake Michigan was crisp and refreshing. I stood at the glass railing looking down at the bustling streets hundreds of feet below. I raised my smartphone, framing the perfect shot. The glittering skyscrapers formed a majestic backdrop. The crystal wine glass caught the golden hour sunlight perfectly. My face, relaxed, glowing, and completely unbothered, occupied the center of the frame. I flashed a sharp, victorious, and genuinely happy smile. I pressed the capture button. I opened my email application and created a new message, placing both Donovan and Cynthia in the recipient line. I did not type a single word in the body of the email. I left the subject line entirely blank. I simply attached the high-resolution photograph of my immaculate, wealthy, and peaceful new reality. I pressed send. The second the message cleared my outbox, I navigated directly to the security settings on my devices. With a few swift, decisive taps on the screen, I permanently blocked Donovan's email address. I blocked Cynthia's email address. I blacklisted both of their phone numbers from ever reaching my device again. I erected an impenetrable digital fortress. The guillotine fell with absolute finality. They were officially and permanently erased from my universe. I would never hear their whining voices, read their fabricated excuses, or witness their pathetic groveling ever again. They were left to stare at a photograph of my absolute triumph while sitting in their miserable, squalid reality. Taking a slow, satisfying sip of the incredible wine, I leaned against the balcony railing and let the profound silence of my new life wash over me. Society often conditions women to believe that revenge requires dramatic, screaming confrontations. We are taught that achieving justice means engaging in bitter, exhausting public wars, defending our honor against people who never respected it in the first place. But true, absolute revenge does not require raising your voice. Real vengeance is not fought in the mud with pathological liars. True revenge is protecting your peace at all costs. It is utilizing the cold, undeniable truth to legally and financially disarm your enemies, and then simply walking away to live a brilliantly successful life. I had used their own staggering greed to orchestrate their downfall, and I did it without shedding a single tear. My existence now is entirely devoid of the suffocating, toxic expectations that once defined my marriage. I am not a cold, barren woman. I am a fierce, highly successful corporate director who controls her own destiny. I no longer have to dull my intellect to accommodate the fragile ego of a mediocre man. More importantly, the ashes of that miserable family dynamic yielded a genuine chosen family. Jamal and Brittany are no longer just my former in-laws, they are my closest allies. We share lavish dinners at my penthouse every single week. Brittany has completely flourished since cutting ties with her incredibly toxic parents, stepping out of the shadow of their impossible, bigoted expectations. Jamal and I frequently share a knowing smile across the dining table, silently acknowledging the flawless legal and financial execution we pulled off together. We operate as a tightly knit unit bonded by mutual respect, unwavering loyalty, and the shared survival of a devastating family war. We celebrate our corporate victories, support each other's ambitions, and enjoy the profound luxury of a life free from manipulation. The meticulous logic of forensic accounting saved my life. I balanced the ledger, extracted the toxic liabilities, and maximized my own personal equity. The people who tried to replace me with a purchased biological weapon are now facing the exact terrifying consequences of their own actions. The universe always corrects a fraudulent balance sheet eventually, but sometimes it requires a highly skilled auditor to accelerate the process. Do not ever let your kindness become a tool for someone else's selfish ambition. Do not let toxic relatives convince you that your success is a character flaw. Always protect your assets, guard your peace, and never be afraid to let the trash take itself out. You have heard exactly how I dismantled my ex-husband and his incredibly malicious mother using nothing but financial data and the brutal truth. Now I want to hear from you. How would you have handled discovering a mother-in-law's ultimate calculated betrayal? Would you have gathered the evidence in silence, or would you have confronted them immediately? Leave your story in the comments below, and remind yourself that the best revenge is always a life phenomenally lived. The most profound lesson from Sydney's journey is that true vindication never requires sinking to the level of your abusers. Instead of engaging in chaotic emotional warfare, Sydney leveraged the undeniable power of truth, meticulous documentation, and financial independence to dismantle the toxic forces in her life. She powerfully demonstrated that establishing ironclad boundaries and fiercely protecting your inner peace is the ultimate form of revenge. By maintaining absolute composure, you allow malicious individuals to orchestrate their own spectacular downfall through their sheer arrogance and greed. Have you ever successfully outsmarted a toxic family dynamic? Share your experiences and comment below.